Rain lashed against the windshield. Headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the deserted highway. Another late night at work, another lonely drive home. The radio crackled with static, a symphony for the storm. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The old highway wound through dense woodland. Tonight it felt different, oppressive. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every rustle sent a jolt of fear. My headlights danced across the rain-slicked asphalt. The rhythmic thud of the windshield wipers was hypnotic. Suddenly, a flash of white shattered the silence. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. The car skidded to a stop, the silence deafening. Standing in the downpour was a woman. She was drenched to the bone, her white dress plastered to her thin frame. Her long, dark hair clung to her face, obscuring her features. One hand clutched a worn leather satchel, the other raised in a silent plea. I hesitated, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. The storm raged around her, the wind whipping her hair into a frenzy. She looked so vulnerable, so utterly alone, yet something about her, something in the way she stood, sent a shiver down my spine. I lowered the window a crack, the roar of the storm flooding the car. "Do you need help?" I called out, my voice barely audible above the wind. The woman turned her head slowly, and for a fleeting moment I saw her face. Her eyes, wide and dark, seemed to pierce through me, sending a chill down my spine.
"Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse and strained. "My car, broken down the road."
I hesitated again, my better judgment warring with a surge of sympathy. It was a dangerous night to be stranded, especially on this deserted stretch of road. I couldn't, in good conscience, leave her here. "Get in," I said finally, unlocking the passenger door. She slid into the car, bringing with her the scent of rain and something else, something faintly metallic that I couldn't quite place. She didn't speak, just clutched her satchel tightly in her lap and stared straight ahead. I drove on, the silence in the car thick with unspoken tension. Every now and then I would steal a glance at my passenger, trying to get a better look at her face. But it remained shrouded in shadow. We drove for what felt like hours, the storm showing no signs of abating. The woman remained silent, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. I was starting to regret my decision to pick her up. "How much further?" I asked, trying to break the unnerving silence. The woman didn't answer. She simply pointed a pale finger towards a narrow, overgrown track that branched off the main road. It was barely visible in the pouring rain. I slowed the car to a stop, my headlights illuminating the entrance to the track. "Are you sure this is it?" I asked, my voice tight with apprehension. The woman nodded, her eyes still fixed on the track. Then, before I could say another word, she opened the car door and stepped out into the storm. I watched in disbelief as she melted into the darkness, swallowed by the shadows and the driving rain. One moment she was there, the next she was gone, as if she had never existed. I sat there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest, unsure of what I had just witnessed. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain. Shaking off the feeling of unease that had settled over me, I put the car in gear and drove away. The image of the woman, vanishing into the darkness, lingered in my mind, sending shivers down my spine. The drive home was a blur. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched, that something was amiss. Every shadow seemed to hold a sinister shape. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. As I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe the woman had just needed a lift to a nearby house. Maybe I had imagined her disappearance. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. The morning dawned bright and clear, washing away the previous night's storm like a bad dream. As I stepped outside, The crisp air and the sound of birdsong were a welcome contrast to the eerie silence that had greeted me upon returning home. But as I glanced towards the road, a flash of silver caught my eye. Lying in the grass, glinting in the morning sun, was a small silver locket. It was the same locket the woman had been clutching so tightly in her hand. My heart skipped a beat as I picked it up, my fingers trembling slightly. It was cold to the touch, as if it had been lying there all night. As I turned it over in my hand, I noticed a small inscription on the back. "To my dearest Emily, may you always find your way back to me." A chill ran down my spine as I read the inscription. Who was Emily? And who was the woman I had picked up the night before? I tried to dismiss it as a strange coincidence, but the locket felt heavy in my hand, a tangible reminder of the unsettling encounter. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had stumbled into something dark and dangerous, something I didn't understand. The day passed in a haze of unease. I couldn't concentrate at work, the image of the woman and the inscription on the locket constantly replaying in my mind. I felt a growing sense of dread, a premonition that something bad was going to happen. That evening, I decided to go back to the spot where I had dropped the woman off, hoping to find some answers, some explanation for the previous night's events. As I drove, the radio, which I had turned on for some semblance of normalcy, crackled to life. The news bulletin, usually a droning background noise, caught my attention. And in other news, police are appealing for information regarding the disappearance of local woman Emily Carter. Miss Carter, 28, was last seen. My blood ran cold. The name, the age, it couldn't be a coincidence. The newsreader continued, wearing a white dress and carrying a silver locket. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white as a wave of nausea washed over me. The image of the woman in the storm, her pale face, her wide, dark eyes flashed before me. The radio droned on, but I could no longer hear the words. The weight of the locket in my pocket felt unbearable, a tangible link to something sinister. I had to tell someone, had to go to the police. But what could I say? That I had picked up a ghost? That I had seen a woman vanish into thin air? They would think I was crazy. As I drove, the road seemed to stretch out before me, endless and menacing. The trees lining the highway, once familiar landmarks, now seemed to leer at me, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. I reached the spot where I had dropped the woman off. The overgrown track looked even more sinister in the fading light, a dark maw leading into the unknown. I stopped the car and got out, drawn to the spot by a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. I took a step towards the track, then another, my heart pounding in my chest. As I peered into the undergrowth, I thought I saw a flicker of movement, a flash of white in the gathering darkness. I held my breath, listening for any sound, any indication that I was not alone. But there was nothing. Only the deepening shadows and the unsettling feeling that I was being watched. I took a step back, my skin prickling with goosebumps. It was time to leave, to put this behind me. As I turned to go, my foot caught on something half hidden in the undergrowth. I looked down and saw a flash of white. It was a piece of fabric, torn and muddied, but unmistakably part of a white dress. A cold hand seemed to close around my heart, squeezing the air from my lungs. The locket in my pocket felt like a brand, a mark of something sinister I couldn't escape. I stumbled back to the car, my mind racing. Was this the spot where Emily Carter had disappeared? Had she run into the woods seeking help, only to meet with a terrible fate? I didn't have the answers, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't want to know. Some things are best left buried, some questions unanswered. The rain began to fall again, a soft, insistent drumming against the windshield.